Welcome to Free Thought Matters. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. Annie Laurie and I are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of freethinkers. That's mainly atheists, agnostics, and humanists. And we work to protect the constitutional principle of the separation between state and church.
And we'd love to have you join us at FFRF.org or get acquainted by asking for information. And we'll send you a free trial membership, including our newspaper, Free Thought Today.
Today, we're very pleased to have in studio with us the new president of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Rachel Laser is a lawyer, an advocate, and a strategist who's dedicated her career to making our nation more inclusive, and now runs the nation's oldest and most venerable organization dedicated to the separation between religion and government. She previously served as senior counsel at the National Women's Law Center, where she founded the Pharmacy Refusal Project, which challenges pharmacists who refuse women's birth control prescriptions in the name of religion.
So welcome. It's so nice to meet you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Sure. So you have said that you know personally what it's like to be a religious minority in this country and why it's so important for everyone to be treated with fairness and inclusion. So what is your background?
So I grew up as a Reformed Jew in Chicago, so not even in New York, although there's a fair number of Jews who live in my neighborhood in Chicago. And when you're part of a population that is 2% of the country, you know what it feels like to be outside of the norm or not the baseline. And you feel it in 1,000,001 ways in your daily life. And of course, you feel it in the more explicit ways that the church and specifically Christianity is sort of taken up by the government through holidays in public school, often what we battle at Americans United religious displays, even in public buildings, et cetera. And I'll even say that even when you see In God We Trust in public schools, even though it's true that in the Judeo-Christian tradition there is a God, Jewish kids tend not to feel that it's talking about their God or their religion. So, so I'm part of a religious minority, which also, by the way, being Jewish makes me feel like giving back to this country, because this country has been kind to Jews. You know, Jews have suffered from religious persecution, including my own relatives who fled, you know, the Tsar in Russia, and has received us with open arms. Overwhelmingly, we've been able to thrive here. And a lot of Jews, like me, feel indebted to the country and feel like we want to give back to America and help keep America to its promise of freedom and equality for all.
And one of the reasons that religious minorities and everyone can thrive in the United States is, of course, that the government is not supposed to take sides on religion.
That's right.
So now you're dedicating your life to working for separation of church and state at Americans United.
Very true.
And I wondered, you've been there for, 20-some months?
Yep.
Any surprises, about this position and how you're treated or the problems we're facing with, assaults against separation of church and state?
No big surprises. I'm the first female leader of the group in its 73-year history. I'm the first non-Christian leader of the group in its 73-year history. Occasionally we'll have people show up at the office and have absolutely no idea that I may be the leader of the office, which sometimes I think has something to do with the fact that I'm a woman. Mm-hmm. But it's an amazing group of people. There's 32 people who work at our national headquarters in Washington, dedicated, loyal separationists, smart, expert, and truly devoted to an inclusive country from a wide array of religious and non-religious backgrounds. And it's really a joy to work in that regard in such a diverse environment. You asked if anything surprised me. Something that I noticed already from my short time on the job is that we have two groups who are our most loyal supporters, who I think are our most passionate supporters at Americans United. And those are people who are deeply identified with being religious and people who are strongly identified with being non-religious or atheist, both. And so it's been really interesting to see those two groups come together at Americans United, whereas there's not many occasions where they're intentionally coming together.
Because we all benefit from the First Amendment, believers and non-believers alike.
Exactly.
Don't you think that most, or many or most believers actually support state-church separation because it's good for their religion?
Absolutely. I mean, even in the Bladensburg Cross case that went to the Supreme Court, a bunch of Christian groups submitted a friend of the court brief and talked about how it would sully the cross, which is the most sacred symbol of Christianity, to say that it was a secular symbol, that it actually means that, eternal life for believers, and that it shouldn't be communicated that it's something secular, represents all the dead.
Yeah, looking at this symbol of Christianity and say that's not a religious symbol. There's that old saying that when religion and government mix, they both get dirty. They should be kept separate.
Yep.
We talked about, you started this pharmacy refusal. Mm-hmm. Is AU doing anything along the lines of fighting against the so-called religious freedom of pharmacists to be bigoted?
We are fighting against religious refusals writ large. Obviously, it's a much larger issue than pharmacists. They're included. Recently, I'm sure you both know that the government issued a new rule from Washington, which we call the denial of care rule. It would allow anyone associated with the healthcare system in America, anyone from the scheduler to the orderly to the nurse to the doctor, to refuse a patient or deny services to a patient based on their moral or religious beliefs. So it's a very scary rule. We've actually brought 2 lawsuits, one in Maryland and one in California. So what we're seeing today really is this invitation to such a wide group of Americans to discriminate in the name of religion. And we know that who are primarily targeted with these types of rules are the non-religious, religious minorities, women, and the LGBTQ community. So we're spending a lot of our time in those spaces.
So could an atheist doctor refuse to care for a creationist, let's say, under that same law?
You all would bring the lawsuit. It's definitely possible, but we know that that's not what this was intended for.
Because most atheists care about this world. This is what they're concerned with.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, what do you see as the worst in legislation, besides these, most of it is being promulgated through the Trump administration by rules, but are legislation good and bad in Congress?
Yeah, we're particularly focused. We fight bad legislation in Congress every day. So we do a lot of it at a granular level. It's a little subtle. It's not as accessible to folks. There will be exemptions that are put into a wide array of bills that we have to sort of address and take care of and bring our members' voices to, alert our coalition partners. But where we're spending a lot of time fighting these days is really in the states as well, because of the laboratory that the states are for Congress. And you all know, but I want to make sure that everyone out there knows about Project Blitz, which is a particularly scary effort, I think aptly named, in state legislatures to codify a Christian nation. And about a couple years ago, we all discovered it, and their playbook, which is 150 pages, was posted with talking points, 21 model bills. They sent it to almost 800 state legislators across the country, and they were very explicit about their agenda, which was to pass an escalating series of bills, starting, small, but with the ones that tackle more symbolic religion, that are more easily passed, like posting "In God We Trust" in public schools, or forcing public schools to have Bible classes, and then escalating all the way through to bills that would allow for discrimination in the name of religion. We saw over 60 of those bills introduced across the states this year. And so this was actually one of my favorite moments so far at Americans United. we organized a coalition meeting in our big conference room. And here's who we invited to the table: civil rights groups, LGBTQ groups, reproductive freedom groups, secular groups, and faith groups, and education groups, because public schools are implicated. And there was so much energy in the room, because it's rare to bring all of these sectors together where all of our interests as Americans are uniting in making sure that we're keeping religion and government separate. So we've played a leading role, really, in keeping this coalition informed. We all created a statement together with all of our signatures on it, which is very powerful for folks in the states to be able to show a state legislator who may not understand that especially one of these stage 1 bills is actually related to this larger Christian nationalist effort.
So who's behind it? Who is Project Blitz?
3 religious right groups actually are funding it, and the National Prayer Caucus Foundation, the National Legal Foundation. These are all groups that are led by white evangelical Christians. They have a long track record of promoting the use of religion to discriminate in our country, and a very clear agenda, which is to codify a Christian nation.
And we want to talk about what's going on with the Supreme Court when we come back from the break. But could you just briefly give us the history of Americans United, when it was founded?
Yeah. So we were founded almost 73 years ago in Chicago, where I'm from.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, by a group of Methodist pastors, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, Seventh-day Adventists, a large group of actually mostly religious folks, theologically diverse, politically diverse, but all very worried about keeping to our commitment in the First Amendment of religious freedom for all. And, we've been thriving ever since then. So it's a really, it's an organization that's preeminent in this space of church-state separation, because that's all of our focus. And I'm very honored to be able to lead it.
Well, we are going to take a break. We're talking with Rachel Laser, and we are going to talk about the scary situation with the Supreme Court and what secularists face all around the country, these assaults on the separation of church and state.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
My name's Jarvis, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. There are many reasons why I'm an atheist, but I'll start with the crudest explanation. I'm sure many of you have seen Clash of the Titans or The Immortals or 300, these blockbuster films about ancient Greek or Roman religion, which we now call mythology. But back then it wasn't mythology. It was very real for them. They genuinely believed that you had to put a coin in a person's mouth before they were buried so that they could pay for the literal ferry to the afterlife. Just as many people today believe that they should eat crackers and wine on a Sunday, or that God wants women to hide their bodies under black burqas. Every religion that has ever existed, and there are many, have all believed that they were right, that their rituals and rules and beliefs were 100% correct, and they all thought they nailed it. But where are they today? If they're not completely forgotten, they're on the silver screen, amusing us with their sword fights, animal sacrifices, and oracles. The religions of today are the entertainment of tomorrow. Everyone, I hope, is an atheist about Zeus and Apollo, Juno and Poseidon. I just added Jesus and Muhammad to that list.
Thank you for watching Free Thought Matters. You can find more content by the Freedom from Religion Foundation at our website, ffrf.org. Follow FFRF on Facebook, and you'll get notifications about all of our content, including whenever we go live on FFRF's Ask an Atheist. FFRF is also on YouTube, where all of our programs, including this show and our weekly news bites, are available to watch anytime. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the web.
And welcome back to Free Thought Matters. We're continuing our discussion with Rachel Laser, who's president of Americans United, about the scariest threats our nation is facing in terms of theocratic inroads.
And Rachel Laser recently accepted an award from the Freedom from Religion Foundation on behalf of Americans United, the Henry Zumach Freedom from Religious Fundamentalism Award at FFRF's National Convention. And we have a little clip of her there.
Some people say it's hopeless to challenge social norms around religion right now. They tell us not to devote time to cases like Bladensburg Cross and to stick to the more winnable and substantive battles like preventing religious refusals in the realm of healthcare and employment. Yes, those fights are critical, and we at AU are certainly engaging in them. But we cannot and must not give up on fighting for an inclusive baseline. The reason is simple. We will not achieve our country's promise of true religious freedom until non-theists, the non-religious, and religious minorities are as accepted as Christians. That deserves applause.
So, Rachel, why do you think there's so much confusion in our country about the meaning of the Establishment Clause of our First Amendment?
Great question. You know, as I've thought about it, there is a role for religion in this country for many people, right? And there's an infrastructure for feeding and clothing the poor. There's a community structure for a lot of Americans. And at the same time, it's true that in our country, there is a sad history of religion and even religious freedom embodied in the First Amendment being misused to keep traditional power structures in place and to turn back the clock on equality, right? So we've seen over time religion misused to advance slavery, to advance racism, and to advance to turn back the clock on women's equality, certainly over time. Today, we're seeing it misused to turn back the clock on LGBTQ equality, especially because of the recent progress for that community. So why are we seeing that happen? Why is there this campaign that's so emboldened right now? I think it has something to do with the changing demographics in our country, and I'll start there. Starting in 2014, my friend and colleague of many years, Robbie Jones, who runs PRRI, Dr. Jones, wrote a book about this. He told us that white Christians ceased to be a majority in America, starting in 2014. That's an enormous demographic change, in this country.
And they're mad about it.
Well, fearful,
Yeah.
And add to that, that we've had our first black president and that the country is supposed to be majority black and brown by 2046. Add to that the Me Too movement and the women's empowerment movement, which has really seen sort of a new energy in recent times, sent over 100 women to Congress in 2016. And add to that the rise of the non-religious, right? I mean, the non-religious are growing.
26%,
right?
According to Pew, just recently.
Right. I mean, at the same level, or if not more, as Catholics, and so these are enormous changes, that we're seeing in our country. And I think, in particular, white Christians who are wanting to see traditional power structures stay in place are feeling very fearful and very emboldened by a president, President Trump, who is kowtowing to them because he knows that they're his voting base. And so right now what we're witnessing is this deliberate campaign to speak to that fear and to tell this group of folks, don't worry, we're going to make America great again. In other words, we're going to maintain white Christian power and privilege in this country. And how are we going to do that? By securing and maintaining this religious and Christian baseline.
I
in the
remember that
country.
feeling when I was a Christian minister, a white Christian minister.
Yes.
I used to think the Bill of Rights was for us. The Bill of Rights was to protect us, our Christian freedoms in this country. But when you're pointing out that the Bill of Rights is for the minorities.
That's right. That's right. And that's what the First Amendment is for too. I mean, even Thomas Jefferson, right, who wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which is largely seen as the foundation for what became the First Amendment, said that it was to protect the Christian and the Jew and the Mahometan and the infidel of every religion. Right? That was so long ago, right? That was back in the late 1700s. And, you know, he got it right. And that was really what was at the heart of our first freedom and our First Amendment. It was protecting, you know, minority religious interests, but the Christian too, right? Which is where we started this conversation. Everybody. Yeah.
So don't you think, though, that part of the problem is that there's just people believe a big lie that this is a Christian nation? I mean, it seems to be the root misunderstanding. And I don't know if you want to, I mean, you've just talked about Thomas Jefferson, the Bill of Rights, and we have a godless constitution, but people don't really grow up in our schools learning this anymore. Perhaps they see in God we trust on the currency, under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, and they misunderstand the secular roots of our nation.
Right. No, I think that that's true, and that's deliberate, right? And we know that it was not until the 1950s that the national motto became "In God We Trust," and money had "In God We Trust," and the pledge added "Under God." I mean, all these things were not part of the founding of the nation. They came into play when America was, you know, freaking out about godless communism and adopted these means of keeping the nation, you know, on track. So it's not part of our foundation. You know, even the chaplaincy in Congress, right? That we have a chaplain in Congress. Why do we have a chaplain in Congress? Well, some would say it was always there, and that the same folks that adopted the First Amendment said it was fine to have a chaplain in Congress. You know, the founders later regretted that and said they took that back, right? Even the founders said, James Madison himself said, you know, when you think about this, you've got to understand that if you're reading the First Amendment, it is wrong. So there is a myth around this, and I think that, just I'll say one more thing about it. You know, I think there's a wokeness that's sort of happening today throughout society, right? And what I mean by that is there's a movement to understand what you don't see when you're part of a majority group, right? And we're all multifaceted, right? So I'm white, part of a majority group, Jewish, part of a minority group, right? Lots of us are multifaceted. But I think what happens is it's not all malintended, right? I mean, what happens is when you're part of a majority group, you don't see how your baseline is the baseline, right? You just think it's normal because it's normal for you, and you don't realize what you're missing and the privilege that attaches to that, right? So when you pass a law to have, you know, Christian holidays be the holidays that kids get school off, you know, that's not necessarily a malintended law that folks are passing. It's not intending to be exclusionary, but it is. And what's dangerous about today is that the court now, the Supreme Court, is saying that things that are traditions get to stand just because they're traditions. So that's why the court said, 7 justices to 2, that it was fine for the government to have a government-maintained cross on public land, you know, which is, if you think about that reasoning, you know, that we should just sort of pay homage to traditions in this country because they're traditions.
Or they've happened for a long time.
Because they've happened for a long time. That would be very bad for some of the ways that we're trying to achieve our promise of equality for all.
Yeah, we had Jim Crow, we had slavery, women couldn't vote.
Right.
That was a tradition.
Right.
So, well, we're almost out of time, but I do want to return to this scary issue of the U.S. Supreme Court, because I know for Americans United, which has a strong legal arm for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, this is a very grave moment for us.
Yep.
And any words of solace, any fighting words to end with about what we're going to do about the changing landscape with the courts under the Trump administration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, this is a long game that we're all in and that we're all playing. But in the end, I'm confident that we're going to be on the winning side. Why? Because the demographics are changing in this country, because we have the Constitution on our side, and because we are a smart and strategic movement, right? And so what we need to do is continue to be experts in court, be experts in Congress and in state legislatures, and what you all are doing so effectively as well, build up the movement of Americans who understand the importance of church-state separation, making sure that we're reaching the next generation of leaders too, and people of color in the next generation as well, so that we have a movement in place to elect the right folks, to appoint the right judges, and that we give policymakers across the country the confidence that they should have to take the votes that we need them to take.
Well, we need to protect the First Amendment because it protects all of us.
That's right.
Well, Rachel Laser, it's a great pleasure to meet you. We're so pleased you're here and admiring of Americans United for Separation of Church and State in your work.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Free Thought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.